What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to take a look at the free hit for game week 28. So I'm going to go through some quick thoughts first of all, and then show you the draft itself. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Now, for most people, the decision of whether or not to free hit should probably have already been made before this week, because it would have changed your transfers. But judging by the stream last night, some people are still undecided, and they're looking at whether or not to wildcard or free hit. Now, that particular decision probably comes down to how well set up you are in double game week 29. So if you decide to free hit this week, go onto a transfer planner like FPL.team and see what your team will look like in double game week 29. Bearing in mind you'll only have one transfer. So after a free hit, you cannot roll a transfer. Everyone will have one. And if you're not that well set up, you should probably be wildcarding instead, because a wildcard this week is quite similar to in 26 and 27 in that it can set you up well for the blank and for the double in 29 and beyond that as well. There are a few differences in the types of teams you would put together. Like Harry Kane, for example, you could keep him on a wild card in 28, but you're probably better off in the long run not doing that. You also probably wouldn't have Ivan Toney because obviously the suspension and the ban that's looming over his head, so you just wouldn't take that risk. But most of the team is quite similar. I guess on a wild card you'd have to think about Brighton players and stuff like that, but ultimately if you were to wild card this week, it would get you through 28 and 29 and beyond, and then you could just save your free hit for later. The other kind of opportunities for using the free hit are probably game week 32, which is another blank for some teams. We don't yet know 100% confirmed who's going to blank, but Brighton and Man City very likely, and Man United and Chelsea also likely as well if Man United beat Fulham in the FA Cup. Then you've got game weeks 34 and 37, which will be double game weeks, not as big as game week 29, but it could still be useful to have a free hit for that. So that's some things to think about. If you're not well set up for double game week 29, I would probably just wildcard this week instead of free hitting. Whether or not you should free hit probably depends on how many players you can get out in game week 28 without a free hit, and also the quality of those players. So for example, a lot of people have got Tarkowski left over from bringing him in a few weeks ago, and to be fair, he got the clean sheet against Brentford. I think he got bonus points as well, so he did well there. But it's Chelsea away in game week 28, and I feel like that's a pretty good chance of Everton conceding. So you could count him as a player. He could get you 1 to 2 points. I wouldn't really be expecting much more than that, but on a free hit you can get to 11 and get better quality players in. So again, if you're someone that's on like 5 or 6 players, then the free hit looks pretty obvious unless you've got a wild card instead. If you can get up to kind of 9, 10 and they're good quality players, maybe you don't need a free hit. For my team, for example, I mean, obviously I've wildcarded, so I've set up to purposely not free hit. With 1 or 2 of my free transfers, I can get to 10 or 11 players. So there's absolutely no need for me to free hit. You might be in a different position. And then this week, you would say the best fixtures to target are probably Chelsea against Everton at home, Arsenal against Palace at home, Villa against Bournemouth at home. So there's some very good home fixtures this week. And then Spurs is an away game, but it is against Southampton. So you could take a punt on players like Son, etc. But I'll go through the draft and talk about which players you might want to move on or change to other players if you wanted to. All right, let's look at the defensive options. And as I go through the draft, I will talk about other players you could pick instead of the ones that I've chosen, because I know a lot of you are probably looking at the screen thinking, why on earth has he got triple Chelsea defence? And I will talk about that in a minute. On the bench, I've got Ward, Trippier, Botman and Bailey. When I build my free hit drafts, I tend to just put together the first 11 that I would ideally want, and then any money left over gets spent on the bench. And we're not worried about long-term picks or long-term squad structure, so having someone like Trippier first bench is fine. Likewise, Leon Bailey, not guaranteed to start, but realistically on a free hit, you're not going to need your third bench spot, so I wouldn't really worry too much about that. He's just nice and cheap to fill a position. Ward is the cheapest nailed on goalkeeper, and Botman is a cheap nailed defender as well. If you didn't have triple Chelsea in your 11, you could go for someone like Fofana instead, but again, I wouldn't really worry too much about spots like that. Get your first 11 picked and then go for the best bench options after that. With Trippier, he is absolutely good enough that you could play him ahead of any of the defenders that I've gone for, maybe even one of the midfielders, and just play a 4-3-3 instead, because we know what he's capable of, right? He could get a 9, 12, 15 pointer against Nottingham Forest away. And for anyone that's not free hitting, myself included, pretty much all of us are going to play Trippier. So his ownership is massive. I'm not saying we should sell him. I'm not saying he's a bad option. But on a free hit, I just wonder whether you could take that little bit of a risk and go for some potential upside by not having him in the 11 and just hoping that Nottingham Forest can score. Because obviously he could still get attacking returns like he did against Wolves in game week 27, but the chances of getting a massive score without that clean sheet is a lot less likely. So are James, Gabriel, Chilwell, etc. capable of scoring more? Possibly. It's not without risk, and if you're not comfortable taking that risk, then you should put him in the 11. It's very easy for me to sit here when I'm not on free hit and say, well, you should consider benching Trippier. If I was on free hit, would I do it? I'd like to think I would, but it would be a lot harder of a decision to make. But in the defence itself, goalkeeper position, I've gone for Kepa. I do think he's the best goalkeeper this week. Very good chance for a clean sheet and decent for saves as well. I guess a lot of it depends on, one, are you happy going for triple Chelsea defence? And if not, and you just want to double up, do you drop one of James or Chilwell, or do you drop the goalkeeper? I actually think you'd probably be better off dropping someone like Reece James instead and just playing Trippier, right? And just not having that Chelsea spot there and going for Kepa and Chilwell. The reason is, there are other goalkeepers you could go for, but I don't know if they're better than Kepa. So there's a lot of good home fixtures this week. Aston Villa against Bournemouth is one, so you could go for Martinez. Is he better than Kepa? I'm not so sure. And also, one of the reasons I've got no Villa defenders in, even though I think they're pretty good for this week, is Bournemouth have scored in the last 3 games against Arsenal, Liverpool and Man City. So can they do that against Villa? Absolutely. So you could go for Martinez, but I think Kepa is better and playing in a better defensive team. And the other option is to go for someone like Ramsdale, but you'd have to drop one of your outfield Arsenal players. And I just think I'd rather have Kepa and Gabriel than Ramsdale and a different defender instead. So that's, again, I always talk about this. When you build teams like this, it's a domino effect, right? You pick one player from a team that removes that spot elsewhere, so then you've got to choose someone different. I just think Kepa makes things easy. The reason I've got James and Chilwell is just because of their attacking upside when they play in a wing-back system. When they're a full-back, they're still good, but not as good from an FPL perspective. When they're playing as a wing-back, the potential is huge, right? That is a team that can get a clean sheet against Everton at home, and then you've got the attacking potential on top. Now, I'm a little bit worried about Reece James because he's missed 3 of the last 5 league games. A couple were because of, I think it was a tight hamstring. The last one was because of illness, so we'd have to wait and see what Potter says. If he says he's fine, then you could take that risk. If you don't want to, I fully get that, and you just put Trippier in instead. And I think with Chilwell, he obviously hasn't played a huge amount this season, but recently he has been getting back-to-back starts and kind of 80 to 90 minutes in those games, including turnarounds where it was a Saturday to Tuesday game with the Champions League. So I think Chilwell looks great. I think I would definitely have Kepa and Chilwell. It's just whether or not you go for James or a different Chelsea player instead. And again, Trippier is very easy to put into that spot instead. If you didn't want to go for Trippier and you did want to take that risk, but you also don't want to go for James, then you could go for, I think the next team I would target is probably Aston Villa. The only issue there is I think Moreno is probably the best option, but he's not guaranteed to start. Luka Dean could play in that game, so then you'd probably be pushed to Matt Cash instead. And look, he's a decent option. I just don't think he's as good as those players on the left side, but he recently got an attack and return as well. So if you don't want to play Trippier and you don't want to go for the extra Chelsea player, and you've got 2 Arsenal attackers, so you can't get Zinchenko in as well as Gabriel, I think the next best team to target is Villa, and I would probably go for Cash in that spot instead. But ultimately, I think for me, Kepa, Gabriel and Chilwell would definitely be in. I think the Arsenal defence is so good. Crystal Palace just look toothless in attack at the moment. And obviously Gabriel does have that goal threat. And that is not a knee-jerk based on yesterday. If you've been watching my videos, you know that I kept faith in him over Zinchenko. But again, if you wanted Zinchenko instead, he's perfectly fine, right? So I think Kepa, Chilwell and Gabriel would definitely be in my free hit team. I think it's just whether or not you go for James or Chilwell or go for an Aston Villa defender instead. All right, let's take a look at the midfield, and we'll start off with the easy one first of all, who is Saka. He would 100% be in any free hit team that I put together this week. For my own team where I'm not free hitting, he's probably going to be my captain, so he'd have to be included. I would also want a second Arsenal attacker. The question is which one to go for. Now, against Fulham in game week 27, Jesus was back and on the bench, and he did come on and get some minutes. And to be fair, for someone that's been out for so long, I thought he looked really sharp. He even had a good chance to score, which unfortunately he missed, but did look good in in general. I would just question whether or not he's going to be fit enough to start in game week 28, given that he has been out for so long. But not only that, Arsenal are just playing well without him. So Arteta doesn't need to risk it too early. So I think against Fulham, we'll probably see Martinelli on the left, Trossard up front, and Saka on the right. And I think with that team, Martinelli is playing very well right now. So on a game week 28 free hit, he's probably the one that I would go for alongside Saka. As a long-term pick, I still prefer Odegaard, because I think when Jesus is back up to fitness, we could see Saka on the right, Jesus up front, and then either Martinelli or Trossard on the left. And even if Martinelli keeps his place and he continues to start, we might see what happened earlier on, like a few weeks ago, where Trossard kept coming on around the 60th, 70th minute, and Martinelli lost minutes there instead. And that's when a lot of us started moving to Odegaard. So as a short-term 28 pick, I really like Martinelli. As a long-term pick, I'd probably prefer Odegaard. The other thing on free hit, if you think that Jesus is going to get benched, you could take a punt on Trossard instead. That is also an option. But I think Saka and Martinelli is where I would go. With the other two midfield picks, I'm not really convinced by either of them necessarily, Maddison or Son. It's a bit of a weird one, because for my own team, again, where I'm not free hitting this week, there is a chance that I bring Maddison in, because I do like his double in 29, but I don't think he's essential on a free hit in 28. I think it's a good fixture. As someone that owns Brentford defenders, I'm not expecting a clean sheet. I just worry about that team around him. So you could even go for triple Arsenal attack, drop Maddison and drop Gabriel, and just play Trippier instead and put someone else on the bench like Matt Cash or Moreno or someone like that from Aston Villa, and go that way around instead. So there's a lot of different ways you could play this. Now, some of you are probably thinking, hang on a second, you're not convinced by Maddison, who's looked good, and yet you've got Son on your team who's been rubbish this year. That is true, but it goes back to what I said at the start, when I was talking about maybe benching Trippier for that little bit of risk, that little bit of differential. Son feels like the perfect differential for this week. Most teams that aren't free hitting, they're not even thinking about him. It's not even a case of they want him, they can't get him. They're not even considered getting him in the team, because he's just too expensive. He's not someone that you want long term. There's no doubles for Spurs, and he has been really bad. But I just refuse to believe he's completely forgotten how to score goals and how to play football. And that is almost like a perfect fixture for him against Southampton, where he could turn it around. So let's just say for a minute you swap James for Trippier, and you've got a defensive Kepa, Trippier, Gabriel, Chilwell, Saka, Marseille, Maddison, all very likely to start. Son is your only punt in this team. That feels worth it for me. So I think when you look at the other midfield options, like Buendia or someone like that for Aston Villa, is he better than Son? Probably not. Almiron didn't even start the last game. There's no Nottingham Forest midfielders I want. Billing, maybe, for Bournemouth. He's done well recently. Obviously, we've talked about Maddison. There's not a huge amount of midfielders for Brentford or Southampton. I've kind of skipped over Wolves and Leeds. There's just no players from there I would want. And I think you could take a punt on someone like Sterling, for example. But I think I would prefer just to go for Son and hope you hit that hat-trick like he got earlier on in the season when he randomly got benched, or not randomly, but he got benched against Leicester and then did really well. So the only one I would consider as a punt outside of the players in the team is probably someone like Sterling or Mudryk for Chelsea. But I think I would rather go for Son, because we know what he's capable of. That link up with Kane, can it return for Southampton? Possibly. Is he a good long-term pick? Absolutely not. But on a free hit, I'm pretty sure he'll be in it. I'm actually more sure I would have Son than Maddison, to be honest. And then up front, I've got three penalty-taking forwards, Kane, Watkins and Toney. It just feels impossible to leave Harry Kane out of a free hit draft right now. I said earlier that I'd probably captain Saka for my own team, but Kane is definitely part of that captaincy conversation this week, so he has to be in, especially when I've picked Son, because Kane is the better attacker for FPL right now, so he's got to be there. I'm pretty sure that I would also pick Watkins and Toney, but there are other forwards that people might want to consider, one of which was discussed heavily on the stream last night, is Isak for Newcastle. Obviously got Nottingham Forest away. Now I'll be honest, at the time of recording, and please forgive me, I've still not caught up on the highlights from that game, but apparently Isak played really well, and if you're confident about his minutes going forward, he could generally be a decent pick, right? He's got a good fixture this week, a double in 29, and another double to come down the line, which could be in game week 31, we don't know yet. So he could be good as a more general pick, but for free hit, I feel like there's three better forwards, specifically for game week 28. And also, I'm not as convinced about his minutes as other people. Like, you look at the last, sorry, that's Callum Wilson. You look at the last three games, 67, 28, 63. So when Wilson's not on the pitch, Isak should take penalties. But when he's not on the pitch, Wilson, he's likely to sub on for him, in which case he's going to come off before the 70th minute in a lot of games. They could play together. That is a possibility. I just don't think he's better than Watkins or Toney for this week. The other option is Iheanacho away to Brentford. Similar situation where he is starting a lot of games, and I do think that's probably going to continue. And I think for 6.1 million, he's extremely cheap. But again, doesn't get to 80 minutes very often. 66, 76, 74, 61, etc. Only against Southampton did he get 90 minutes. And to be fair, he's a little bit unlucky not to get returns in that game. But is he away to Brentford better than Watkins at home to Bournemouth or Toney at home to Leicester? I'm not so sure. But again, if you wanted to take a bit of a punt or a differential choice, you could go for Isak or Iheanacho. And the other options are, of course, Chelsea. So you've got Havertz, who should be first choice penalty taker according to Potter, or João Felix if he's fit and available. And I wouldn't massively argue against them as picks this week. If you wanted to go for Havertz over Watkins or Havertz over Toney, you absolutely could. You just have to drop one of the defenders, which isn't an issue. Again, you just drop James, play Trippier, happy days. So they are players you could consider. But I think Watkins has got one of the best fixtures this week against Bournemouth. Absolutely nailed, great minutes. Does take penalties, though I do think he's a bit like Mitrovic. He's not a great penalty taker, but it's still something he's got in his locker. And Ivan Toney cannot be suspended through yellow cards for game week 28, because even if he gets one against Southampton in the second game of 27, he'd have to get one more before he's suspended for 2 games. So the only thing really hanging over him is any ban or anything like that, but I just don't think it's going to happen. And we would probably know before the deadline anyway. And I think Leicester is a great fixture. Like Leicester attack, decent enough. You want to pick Madison, you want to pick Iheanacho, fair enough. Leicester defence, not great whatsoever. Ward is only on the bench because he's so cheap. So I really like Toney in that home fixture. Again, absolutely nailed. Really great minutes like Kane and Watkins, and a really good penalty taker. He would probably be in the team. But I get it that a lot of teams outside of free hits have Watkins, have Kane, have Toney. If you want to go different, it would probably be Havertz for me. Playing well right now, also on penalties. I think I would take him over Isak or Iheanacho. But let me know in the comments below what you think of this team. Also, let me know just how much you hate that Chelsea triple up and how you would definitely have Trippier in the team, because I know most people would. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.